Hey guys, what's up? It's Biscuit Horror Reviews. I'm here with a video that I've had on the back burner for quite a while. In fact, I've had a lot of content on the back burner, I want to say for about a month now. I've been working on the 1,500 subscriber special. You know, I'm very grateful to have reached 1,500 subscribers. That's really cool. And I'm working on the special for that. I was also working on the best and worst of the decade videos, which I already uploaded, and here I am with one of the last, second to last video on my on the back burner. This one, if you couldn't tell, is the 40 best horror films of 2019. It was a struggle because 2019 had some pretty interesting releases. Maybe not the best in terms of quality, but there were a lot of pretty good releases this year, and pretty interesting movies this year. Or, well, this past year. And I decided that instead of narrowing it down to 40, like I did the last couple of years, I'm going to narrow this down to, instead of narrowing it down to 30, I'm doing 40 this time. And I already hate myself for it. I haven't even started filming the segments yet, I already hate myself for it. Either way, this is from 40 to 1, 40 being, you know, the least good film on this list, and 1 being the best. And that's really it. This is going to be divided into 2 parts, each part with 20 titles. So let's just fucking get this show on the road. Goddamn. At the number 40 spot, we have the Netflix original film from the director of Cube, the Cube trilogy, actually. I think he directed all 3 of them. This movie is In the Tall Grass. This is a adaptation of a novella written by Stephen King and his son Joe Hill. This movie got released to Netflix. Nobody was really talking about it. A lot of people were really seeming to despise the film. So I gave it a shot, and I actually thought it was a pretty interesting movie. Was it necessarily, like, great? Considering it's number 40, that's kind of debatable, but in terms of it being a very watchable kind of cosmic horror film that is very accessible, and, you know, it's right there on Netflix if you want to check it out. It's a decent movie. It's essentially a film about these 2 siblings who are traveling to the other side of the country, and they end up stopping where they hear this kid yelling from inside this big field of grass. And this kid claims to be lost in the field, but he sounds like he's only a few yards in there. So they go in after him to try and get him out, and they end up trapped in there as well. And this field of grass is kind of spooky and scary. It's interesting because the director wanted to do the film because he read the novella and thought, man, they made a story where grass is scary. I want to turn that into a movie. And that's what he did. Yeah, it's a pretty good movie. It's decently acted. I thought it was very compelling, very watchable. I was not bored by it at all. And yeah, I would definitely recommend it. At number 39, we have Velociter. We're already going downhill, considering the 40th movie was In the Tall Grass, which was a Stephen King adaptation. Here we have Velociter, which is a film about a pastor whose parents are killed, and then he goes to China to do some soul searching and finds an amulet that turns him into a velociraptor. That's it. That's the movie. He ends up with befriending a prostitute, and they decide, hey, we should use this power for good and kill evil people. And one of the first people he kills is this pimp named Frankie Mermaid, and he says his name is Frankie Mermaid because he's always swimming in bitches. You know, there are 1.5 million like cheap, you know, ultra low budget kind of throwback, you know, horror comedy films, stuff like what's that one, Wolf Cop, for example. Like, I think that's a very great example of one of these kinds of movies. But unlike, you know, some of these kinds of movies where it's trying to go for like a purposely bad, purposely cheesy kind of tongue-in-cheek tone, the film doesn't feel like it's constantly winking at the camera and saying, "Hey, guys, we're being clever. Get it, Velociter." Like, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's. The film doesn't feel like it's trying its hardest, and doesn't feel like it thinks it's super smart, and, you know, thinks it's being clever. Like, the film knows it's dumb, and it just wants you to go with it. And honestly, that's all you can really ask for in one of these kinds of movies. At 38, we have the newest Rob Zombie film, 3 from Hell. So, I didn't think 3 from Hell would even make it on my best of the year list, even when I've decided, yeah, let's do 40 titles. I thought it would be knocked off the list by the end of the year. But surprisingly, it clung on fairly well. Now, 3 from Hell. Is it the best movie ever made? No, not by any means. And nor is it the best film Rob Zombie has ever made. I mean, hell, Lords of Salem is better than this. However, this is a decent return to form for him, especially after, what was the movie he did before this, like 31? That was, like, supremely uninteresting. And I think before that it was Lords of Salem. I don't even remember this dude's filmography, but I personally believe that House of a Thousand Corpses is legitimately a really great, fun, modern exploitation film. Its sequel is a little too self-serious, and it wants you to, like, relate to and feel bad for people who are mass murderers and serial killers and rapists, and it's just like, I can't feel for these people. I don't really like these characters too much. And his other movies all vary, but really, it doesn't get any worse for me than stuff like the Halloween remakes, or the Haunted World of Super Beasto. You know, those are like absolutely fucking god-awful. Those in like 31 are god-awful. That being said, Rob Zombie announced, hey, I'm making a third film, a second sequel to House of a Thousand Corpses. And I was willing to give it a shot, because as much as I don't like The Devil's Rejects, I at least appreciate its existence, and I appreciate the fact that because of its existence, people have become more aware of House of a Thousand Corpses, even if a lot of people hate House of a Thousand Corpses. However, there's one major problem with 3 from Hell, and that is the fact that Sid Haig, the character of Captain Spaulding, is only in one scene. Sid Haig actually died right after this film got its, like, first theatrical release. Like, I think it got not a short, but like a very minor, small-time release in like a handful of theaters for like a weekend, and then I think a few weeks after that, Sid Haig passed away. And it turned out, after the film was released and everything, and after he died, it was revealed that Sid Haig had had cancer for many, many years, and it was something that he hid from pretty much everybody except for a small, select amount of people. And because of his cancer treatment and everything, he couldn't be in the film. He wasn't healthy enough. So Rob had to rewrite the film. And that's probably the biggest problem. is that the film is rewritten into something else, to include a third character who's really never been mentioned in universe and is thrown in to basically be a replacement for Captain Spaulding. And that sucks. That really, really sucks. However, this film is an interesting follow-up because it's set in the 80s. The first two films were set in the 70s. This film is set in the 80s, and it's essentially about the two remaining members of the Firefly clan, Baby, who is Rob Zombie's wife, and Bill Moseley's character, who is Otis Driftwood. These two characters essentially escaping custody and attempting to flee to Mexico with their, I think, cousin, who is like known as the Wolfman. And that character is interesting, enough. And it's basically just kind of a road movie, similar to The Devil's Rejects, except it's not as despicably violent as The Devil's Rejects. And there are more kind of calm, quiet moments in the film. Not to say that this film is, boring, but I personally liked this film more than The Devil's Rejects. The Devil's Rejects is an immensely overrated film. It is just such an ugly, despicable film, and there's nothing about it that is necessarily redeemable. At least with this film, it has some things that are interesting. For instance, a scene where the Firefly clan faces off against a gang of Mexican luchadors set to fucking Inagata de Vida by Iron Butterfly. I know that this segment of the video talking about Free From Hell has been going on for a while, but, if that description, them facing off against Mexican luchador, a gang of Mexican luchadors that are fucking Danny Trejo's character from Devil's Rejects, that are his cousins, or the leader of the gang is his cousin, fighting them to Inagata de Vida. If that doesn't sell this movie for you and make you want to check it out, then, whatever. But this is far from the worst movie of the year. This is far from Zombie's worst film so far. This is far from, I honestly want to say this is probably Zombie's maybe third best movie behind, Lords of Salem. And that's strictly because Lords of Salem has really great visuals. But anyway, yeah, that's 38. I fucking already despise recording this video, Jesus. Next, we got another one, another sequel, It Chapter 2. Man, is this film almost garbage. If it wasn't for the fact that it's very watchable, and the fact that it improves upon the novel, which is a novel I recently finished, if it wasn't for the fact that it improves upon the novel, I think this movie would be even worse. Let me just first say something about the novel. The novel of It. In that novel, excuse me for just a minute, I gotta do something. Now, something about the novel of Stephen King's It is that it's one of the worst horror novels I think that has ever been written in the history of literature. I'm saying that in all honesty. I wanted to like the novel, but there are a lot of things about it that are really hard to stomach, and that's really hard to stomach, and there are things about it that make the horror elements hard to take seriously, and there are just moments where it tries a little too hard with the horror elements, and ends up kind of collapsing in on itself, becoming almost hilarious in how bad its attempts at scaring you And if there's one thing that every adaptation of it, the miniseries, this series of films, and the novel have in common, it's the fact that the segments of every single one of these properties, the segments of when they are kids in Derry, kind of living their lives and encountering it and fighting it when they are kids, are the most interesting parts of the novel, of the miniseries, and of this, of the 2017-2019 movies. And I think that with this adaptation of essentially the adult sections of the novel, the writers and director and everybody decided that it would be best to go for a more comedic tone, because I think they realized that, especially in the adult sections of the novel, things get really fucking stupid and hard to take seriously, and just boring. The adult sections of the novel are straight up boring. If they aren't horribly, like, offensive or weird or just not scary, they are boring. That being said, this film has a lot of really, sometimes funny, sometimes not funny, forced in both intentional and unintentional humor. One of my big problems with the first It film, and keep in mind, that film was like, in terms of my top 30 of 2017, I think that film was at least before the number 15. Before, in like the top 30 for that year, it was at least, I know it was almost in the top 10. This film was at 37 out of 40 titles. But one of my big problems with the first It movie adaptation was that the character of Richie was always cracking jokes. And he's always doing that in the novel as well. But the problem was there were moments that could have genuinely had some actual tension and atmosphere to them, and even been character building moments. But Richie just has to open his fucking mouth. Now, yes, he does that in the novel, but that doesn't happen as often, and because it is a book, it's kind of easier to ignore. However, this is a movie. If a movie is trying to go for this serious, creepy tone, and then a character butts in and makes a joke about how, hey, I had sex with your mom, it's not funny. It's not interesting. It ruins the atmosphere that the scene was attempting to have. And the same thing applies here, except now they really focus on some really rough stuff. There's a part in the novel, in the adult section, about how Pennywise wakes up in the late 80s, and how he wakes up, which is a spoiler for the novel and the film, and I'm not going to spoil it, but how it happens in both the novel and film is legitimately disturbing and disgusting and horrific, and they included that in the film, which I thought was an interesting choice. However, they don't explain why it happens in the film. In the novel, they explain why it happens, but in the film, they do not. So it's just kind of a opening scene that gives you this really grim, disturbing opening for a film that is then going to have a very almost jovial and absurdist humor kind of tone to it. I'm done talking about it. I really am. I'm fucking done. I've talked about the novel so much because I've read it recently, and I really do not want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it or the film adaptations ever again. God. At the number 36 spot, we have the Netflix original film The Perfection. this is a movie that came out, and it had a few of those clickbait articles on Facebook and whatnot. You know, the classic articles of these people fainted watching this movie. These people vomited. They had to give out vomit bags. And I was interested in seeing it, mainly because of that, and because it was just kind of something that was on Netflix. I hadn't really heard about it, and then I just see this one article about it. But this is a film having to do with I think, cello player who is a child prodigy, and she ends up having to leave the academy she was going to, this prestigious academy for cello playing that she was going to, in order to take care of her mother who was dying of cancer. And her mother finally passes away, and she goes to visit the kind of headmaster of this, I guess, academy. Goes to see him and finds out that he replaced her with this other prodigy who is slightly younger than her, and they're trying to, get even more child prodigies in China. They're in China, performing and judging these kids, and they ask her to be one of the judges with this younger prodigy that's replacing her. And the two prodigies develop a bit of a relationship, and then some shit happens. Somebody ends up missing an arm, and yeah. Here's the thing about this movie, is that it's interesting, and it could have been a really good movie. The big problem with it is that, at least with me personally, is that it almost has this unintentionally comedic tone with how the film is edited and how some of the special effects are done. Now, I know not every fucking production company, not every studio is going to be willing to shill out the money for a practical effect of somebody's arm being cut off or something like that. However, if it looks as bad as it does in this fucking movie, maybe it'd be worth investing into. But yeah, the editing of this film makes it feel like a comedy sometimes at certain points, and the CGI gore is just really distracting. I think that there's something in the film. I think there's something going on in the film. I feel like the film is trying to say something about kind of abuse within, prestigious institutions, stuff like that. I think it's trying to say something about how we should, keep an eye on rich people who are being paid and charging people to teach their children things in their free time. Is basically, it's basically saying don't. It's trying to say something about about abuse in institutions like these, and not even just schools or academies, but I will fucking destroy these dogs. But even in orphanages, for a prime example. And I think that is a good enough message to have. I just kind of wish the film was a lot better, because I don't want to watch it ever again. I'd sooner watch It Chapter 2 than watch The Perfection again, honestly. Alright. Shit. I don't even know what the next number is. It doesn't matter. Up next, we got the Banana Splits movie. Now, this is a movie that a lot of people really seem to hate. And I can understand why. It's not necessarily good. But I thought it was very entertaining, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So this is a interesting film, because it is a semi kind of reboot of this famous show from the 60s, the Banana Split show. Um, Except they turned it into a slasher film. Essentially, the setup for this film is that this kid is going to a live taping of the Banana Split show. This film is, set in a modern era where the Banana Splits are still relevant. Nobody knows the Banana Splits, anymore at all, because as far as I know, it wasn't super popular in the 60s, and from then on, it just kind of faded into obscurity, but they decided to make a slasher film out of it, and this kid, is given tickets for his birthday to go to see the Banana Split show taped live. And the Banana Splits are actually robots in the character costumes. And they malfunction and start killing people. If this sounds like Five Nights at Freddy's, well, that's because the studio that produced this film, Warner Brothers, had the rights to Five Nights at Freddy's. A property that I would not want to have the rights to if I was a production company. And they had the rights, and then they lost the rights, and they pretty much had a complete script written. This is the story, at least. This is the theory around it. But they did lose the rights. And the theory goes that they had a script ready, they had already made something, they had already written something. They're like, well, what property do we have that involves people in animal costumes that we can, use this for? And it chose the Banana Splits. It's a weird cash grab, sci-fi original, it aired on the Sci-Fi Channel before getting a Blu-ray and DVD release, which is weird enough. But they decided to do this with it, which I think is really interesting, and I'm also looking forward to the horror movie adaptation of Fantasy Island that is being made by Blumhouse. As much as that is going to suck because it's PG-13, I'm still excited for it, because I think that horror adaptations of, semi-obscure kind of 70s and 60s and 80s cult properties is an interesting way to go about it. But yeah, the Banana Splits movie. Up next, we have a film that maybe isn't a horror film. It's more of a kind of true crime, drama. We have Lords of Chaos. This is a film, semi, kind of biographical, true crime film about the Norwegian black metal group Mayhem. Now, this film would lead you to believe that Mayhem is, the first black metal group. That's bullshit. The first, at least one of the earliest black metal groups was Bathory, which is a band that's actually good. Also, the director of this film was the drummer in Bathory for a week before they fired him because they didn't like him. But yeah, this film, Lords of Chaos, it is about the band Mayhem. Now, if you know the history of this band, you kind of already know what the film is about, and you know why I'm putting it in the horror genre and putting it on this list. For those of you who don't, I'm not going to spoil it. However, this is a metal band who, in the mid to late 80s, achieved a bit of notoriety for members starting the first metal record shop in Norway. I think that's what that shop was considered. Also, their activities were, they were a band that was connected to multiple church burnings, as well as a suicide and 2 homicides. I guess that's kind of a spoiler, but that's as far as it goes, and it's basically just about what happened to them. The film isn't 100% historically accurate, and it's set in Norway, but it's shot in English, which is kind of distracting. Some people complained about the laughable quality of the film and how the characters almost felt like just weird, kind of cringy, like edgy outcasts who wanted to seem cool. But you know, and I hate to say this. Wait, I don't hate to say this. Uh, the people, the people in this film, the characters in this film, who are real people, most likely were exactly that. Because this is basically just a recount of them having an edge off to see who could be the most edgy guy in the group, which resulted in 3 deaths. That's basically what happened in real life, and that's pretty much what was mirrored here. It's talking about the kind of almost the cringeworthy aspects of black metal culture. And yeah, that's what the film is. That's what the film is about. That being said, I still think it's a pretty cool movie. I think it's a pretty interesting movie. Yeah, I think that's all I gotta say about Lords of Chaos. So, on to the next one. Next, we have a film that was shot and had a release of the rough cut in 1990. I'm talking about Wicked World. Wicked World just hit Blu-ray with this remaster of the original cut, as well as this new 2019 director's cut, which, according to director Barry J. Gillis, is the definitive version of the film. So I watched that version, and that's why this film from 1990, from literally 30 years ago, is on a list for movies in 2019, for the best horror films in 2019. This movie isn't necessarily good as much as it is very entertaining and interesting. It's this weird clusterfuck of ideas and, like, visuals. I can't explain the actual plot to this movie, because the plot rundown that every website and every review will give you is basically that the film has to do with a serial killer murdering the girlfriend of a police officer, which then results in the police officer tracking him down and seeking revenge on him. But that's only like 20 total minutes of the film's runtime. The rest of it is dedicated to all kinds of weird, bizarre shit. This is what's known as a Canucksploitation film, a Canadian exploitation film. And this movie is written, directed, and stars the co-writer, co-director, and co-star of the 1989 shot-on 8mm film Things, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, as well as being my favorite bad movie of all time. It's a very fun, very enjoyable movie, and this movie is very similar, and is arguably almost as kind of disjointed and surreal and broken. I wanted to include this one on the best of the year list, mainly because this is supposed to be the definitive cut, like everything that was ever released before, which was, I think, a small VHS release and another like really cheap budget DVD release that was only available for a couple of years. Other than that, this film has never been really available to the public until now, and if it was available, that was the original cut, not the director's cut. That is the reason a film from 1990 is on this list. But yeah, the director's cut, 2019 director's cut of Wicked World is on this list. Up next, we have a horror western film, which is the debut of its director, whose name I cannot remember for the life of me. I wish I could remember, but nevertheless, I'm talking about The Wind. The Wind is an interesting movie. It has these weird kind of, slow burn, intense western elements, like western thriller elements with it having to do with these people living on the plains in this Old West era, and there being some trouble brewing between nearby families and stuff like that. And there may or may not be a supernatural cause to it. it's a pretty creepy and interesting movie, despite there being some somewhat cheesy moments, and there being some moments that are a little slow, a little on the boring side. But still, I legitimately really liked this film and thought it was very, very creepy. And I would definitely recommend you check out The Wind. It's available on Blu-ray from Scream Factory. Next, we got Dry Blood, which is a movie I saw very early on in 2019. I randomly found it on Amazon Prime streaming, which is how I often see so many movies in a year, because there are so many random titles that are thrown onto Amazon Prime that nobody really watches. But this one is a film, I don't know if I already saw the title, I'm going to say it again, Dry Blood. This is a film that has to do with a drug addict who is attempting to kind of go cold turkey, and he goes and stays at this like cabin in the woods, and he is and after he shows up at this house kind of unannounced, that he claims to have rented, or claims that it belongs to a friend, something like that. The local police department, the local sheriff, starts to harass him, follow him around, and maybe even break into his house and plant evidence. And things go pretty downhill as everything starts to unravel, and he starts to hallucinate, and things become clearer and clearer as the film goes on as to what happened to him and what led him to go cold turkey into the fucking mountains and in a cabin in the woods, nonetheless. But, yeah, that's really all I gotta say about this one. I kind of don't want to spoil it. It's a pretty, relatively creepy and well-made little flick. Next, we got the film Winter Skin. This is from a British director, I think. I'm pretty sure the guy's British. Who has been kind of making the rounds recently on different streaming services, kind of just releasing his stuff on there. For instance, this film, Winter Skin, is available, I think, on both Tubi and Amazon Prime. But I saw his film from a couple years ago, Escape from Cannibal Farm, and while it left a lot to be desired, I kind of enjoyed the low budget style, and it was genuinely interesting despite it not being necessarily good, and even a little boring. But I could tell what the director was going for, and I kind of respected the fact that he was going for this certain type of movie. It was also a really gory film. Either way, this film, Winter Skin, is his film that he did that is kind of like a neo-western horror film. Like, it very much reminded me of, like, The Hateful Eight, or Cutthroat's 9, which is a really great kind of almost like slasher film spaghetti western from the 70s. But it's basically a film that has to do with a young man being out in the woods, and it's the middle of winter, and he encounters this old woman who lives in a cabin, and she provides him with food and shelter, and, is keeping him company, and she warns him not to go outside after dark, not to let her dog out after dark, not to leave the house at all after dark, because there is a strange creature out there that leaves red footprints in the snow that will, kill all of them if it gets the chance. And it turns out to be a weird, skinless, humanoid monster. This is a movie that people really seem to fucking hate. And don't get me wrong, the acting isn't good in this movie necessarily. However, the effects are great, the sets are nice, it's a very small film, there's a cast of, I think, a total of 5 or 6 people, and for most of it, it's just 2 people. and a dog. And it's kind of this tense, like almost, I want to describe it as kind of like a dialogue focused, like psychological horror film, with there being kind of psychological games played between the two characters. And it's interesting. Is it the smartest movie around? No. You know, is it necessarily good? Not really, but it's very enjoyable. I found it to be very interesting, and I was entertained throughout. I was glued to the screen the whole time, even if the acting wasn't good. I can't necessarily sit here and say it's a bad movie, like, from at least, you know, in terms of it being an interesting watch. But yeah, Winter Skin, it's definitely worth checking out if you don't mind some bad acting, and can look past bad acting and see the other qualities of the film. Next, we got Brightburn, which is a film written by James Gunn's brother, and it's produced by James Gunn, who did the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, which I don't care about that. He also did Super in like 2010, which was actually a really good kind of vigilante film. Kind of violent vigilante, like superhero-esque movie. And he also did Slither, which is a movie that I personally really like. It's a really entertaining, gooey, gory body horror flick. Body horror zombie movie, I guess. But here we have Brightburn, which was an interesting film to me immediately, because it was filmed like pretty much completely in secret, and it was teased to be released in like November of 2018, and then that stuff with James Gunn's Twitter account happened, and it was pushed back and released towards, I think, like summer or May of 2019. I wanted to check it out. The trailers didn't look too good, mind you, but I wanted to check it out either way because it seemed interesting. The film is basically the Superman origin story of a child from space, a alien child ending up on Earth. But this film is kind of a what-if story, and this film is basically it's a what-if story of what if Superman turned out to be a sociopath or psychopath. And yeah, that's kind of what the film is. It doesn't focus heavily on the superhero aspects, which some people thought was kind of dumb. I personally don't mind that too much. It's mainly just about the character killing people who know about his powers in his small town. That's basically it. It's basically a slasher film with a superhuman Superman kind of fucking... Basically, if Superman went on a killing spree when he was a kid and it was made into a slasher film, that's basically what this movie is. And I personally enjoyed it. Alright. Next, we have Clownnado from director Todd Sheets. Now, I might be a little biased with this film because I first saw it at Cinema Wasteland. I actually caught the screening at Cinema Wasteland, and I was kind of drunk when I saw it, and I haven't watched it since. So I might be a little biased. It might be my drunk, fading memory, you know, telling me that this movie is this entertaining, but Clownnado is really fun. And people seem to agree. I've seen some reviews where, you know, people are saying that this movie is very fun, it's definitely not the kind of movie you expect from it, because you think Clownnado, you think, oh, it's like Sharknado, it's going to be a cheap sci-fi production, but unlike the cheap sci-fi production title, it's a low-budget film, crowdfunded, and all of the gore effects are 100% practical. It's a gory kind of slasher film, more of a slasher film than it is a kind of like natural disaster creature feature, having to do with a voodoo priest cursing a clown and his clown friends who are like complete abusive, power-hungry assholes. And they get trapped inside of a tornado, which they then use as their mode of transportation as they go around and essentially go after the one main clown, his wife, who was cheating on him. But he was abusive, so he had it coming. Either way, it's a really fun, splattery, slasher, neo-giallo noir. Like, the first, 20 to 30 minutes have this really nice kind of neo-noir, almost giallo film feel to them. And then it loses it, which kind of sucks, but still, just an absolutely fun, stupid, enjoyable slasher gore fest that I had a lot of fun with, despite it being very cheap. And seeing it with a crowd definitely made it a lot more entertaining. But yeah, Clownnado, fucking sue me for putting this higher than It Chapter 2. Up next, we have an anthology film featuring segments from director Mick Garris, who has done, I think he was one of the directors on this, as well as the guy who directed Godzilla Final Wars and Midnight Meat Train and Versus, and a couple other directors, one of the directors being, I think, David Slade, who I'm pretty sure he directed Hard Candy. I know for a fact he directed Black Mirror Bandersnatch. Either way, this is a 2-hour-long anthology film. The setup for this anthology is that these people are drawn to this empty movie theater where they sit and they see short films that are edited by the projectionist. And he shows them these short films of essentially what is going to happen to them. How their lives are going to end. And there are some bad shorts in this, most definitely. I think the overall negative reception it's received is kind of, hyperbolic a little bit, because this movie is just fun. I was never bored while watching it. The segments were really interesting, and it was a good variety of segments. It wasn't just, one segment doing one thing that you've seen done a million times, one segment doing another thing you've seen done a million times. Although there are a couple, there's one segment I think that does something like that, but there is one segment where the style and visual aesthetics reminded me so much of Eraserhead. It was really gritty and gross and black and white and just disturbing, honestly. There's one segment that is a parody of slasher films that is really clever and I think really well done. There's one segment having to do with a series of possessions, of demonic possessions at a Catholic school, which is also really good. That one is done by that Japanese director who did Final Wars, which is my third or fourth favorite Godzilla movie. But still, Nightmare Cinema is a really enjoyable, well-rounded anthology film with, I want to say, maybe only one bad segment out of the bunch. And that's really the best you can ask for when it comes to anthology films, is that at a bare minimum, one segment is bad. Up next, we have a documentary horror comedy film. This is a film that is a documentary about this internet phenomenon known as Wrinkles the Clown. Now, to be 100% honest, I had never really heard about Wrinkles the Clown until I heard about this documentary. This is a really interesting documentary, kind of accounting the phenomenon of Wrinkles the Clown, this sort of modern day boogeyman, where he's put up stickers in public places around Florida, and with his phone number on it, and advertised kind of disciplinary services for bad children. And people have used it. People have used it as a disciplinary action, and left voicemails on his voicemail box of them telling their kids that he's going to come and get them, and the kids are crying in the background. And you kind of learn about the mythos of this character. They interview multiple different kids about how these videos of Wrinkles that have appeared on the internet and everything have kind of affected them, and kind of changed their perspective. And in some ways it's negative, some ways it's positive, and it's just a really interesting documentary on this weird, creepy internet phenomenon, and how how it kind of originated and came to be, and it really plays to your expectations quite a bit, and does a few things along the way that I really was surprised by. I would definitely recommend this one. It's a really interesting watch, whether or not you're into documentaries, I would say. And yeah, I genuinely think that this is a pretty cool movie. It's kind of weird that people really seem to hate this one for some reason. I don't know why, but either way, Wrinkles the Clown. Up next, we got a Christmassy horror film. This one is about a guy who is mentally ill, and he has trapped somebody, or I think he's either mentally ill or a drug addict, and he's trapped somebody in his basement, locked somebody in his basement. And he claims, when some people show up, unannounced, uninvited, when I think his brother and his sister-in-law show up, and they find out that there's somebody locked in his basement, he attempts to prove to them that the person he has locked up in the basement is the devil himself in human form, and that by locking this person up, he has made the world a better place. It's an interesting psychological kind of horror film that definitely has a lot going on in it. It's pretty decently acted. It's pretty thrilling. It's interesting. It has an interesting kind of take on this kind of genre of paranoia horror, I want to call it, where it's basically you as the viewer don't even know what's going on. The characters don't know what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on, and I really like that. This film is pretty good. It's interesting. I really don't have too much to say about it other than that. Up next, we have the James Bell film for this year, The Bleak. Now, James Bell released 2 movies this year, which was actually kind of surprising. He usually only does 1 movie every year, or, a couple every few years. But he did 2 this year. One was a short film. They're both short films. But one was a film called Harm that ran for about 11 minutes. And this short film was had to do with essentially a man abusing his wife, and then she kills him. This other one, which is the one I'm putting on this list, is called The Bleak. The Bleak is one that James has been working on for quite a while. He's been working on it for a few months. For, I think, about a year, probably. And it's kind of hard to recount the plot of a James Bell film, because really they're just interesting kind of pseudo art house gore films. the best I can say is what I had to say when you know I when somebody asked me how the film was while I was watching it, which is the description I gave of this film is it's like looking at visions of hell via Satan's own shot on video film collection. Up next, we got The Nightingale. This is the new film from Australian director Jennifer Kent, who gave us The Babadook, which was, shit, when was that, like 2014? That was 6 years ago now. This is fucking wild. I remember The Babadook came out and people were talking about it, and I ended up seeing it, and I thought it was actually really great. Really creepy and scary. Upon rewatching it since then and everything, it's definitely not as good as I remember it being, but it was the first modern horror film in a while that really got under my skin and actually creeped me out. Here we have her follow-up film, which isn't much of a horror film. It's definitely got some horror aspects to it, but it's more of a kind of revenge western road thriller. Essentially about an Irish woman who is, which I think this one's set in like the 1800s, something like that. During the colonization of Australia, during the Aboriginal genocide that was going on there, that was happening during the colonization. And this film has to do with this Irish convict who is essentially, being forced to be a handmaiden, sort of, to this asshole general. And after some things happen, she has to travel with a young Aboriginal guy as her guide through the wilds of Australia in order to seek revenge on this guy. The movie runs for like 2 hours. It's a little misguided at times. It's a little overly explicit and horrific at times. Actual like Aboriginal tribe elders, gave the director their blessing when talking about when working on the film, and they helped her to portray this horrific colonization and genocide as accurately as possible, and in doing so has created a film that is very, very disturbing and not a pleasant watch in the slightest, but it's still a really interesting and very well made film. Up next, we have the sophomore film from Jordan Peele, Us. This was a movie that me and everybody else was very hyped for. To say that it was a disappointment is almost an understatement. That being said, however, the first, I want to say half of the movie is genuinely creepy and unsettling and interesting. The second half, it becomes more of a campy kind of slasher film, with there being, a lot of intentional humor thrown in, and twists that don't make much sense when you really think about it. Either way, the film's biggest problem is that the message is going for, which I kind of don't even want to really talk about the message it's going for too much because I don't really want to spoil it. But the film had a very similar problem that I personally think Darren Aronofsky's Mother had, which is the fact that it focused so much on the message and the what it was trying to go for in terms of its thematic elements. It focused so much on that to the point that the plot suffered, and they couldn't write the plot around it without sacrificing the kind of, I guess, I don't want to say, I don't want to say just sacrificing, I guess, the presence, I guess, of the message, you know, because doing so would affect it a bit. So yeah, Jordan Peele's Us, good movie without a doubt, but not as good as Get Out was. All right. Up next, we have The Headhunter, which is a film from a director who made a little movie in 2008 called Thanksgiving. This movie was a really low budget, cheesy, stupid, but very, very fun slasher film about a killer turkey killing college students over Thanksgiving break. Um, that movie is cheap as hell, and I think it was shot in like Newark, Ohio. It's it's fucking bad, and now we have this director making a film that is a bit more serious. This film is kind of a Viking-esque movie. It was shot in Scandinavia, quite literally, on a low budget with a cast of like 2 people. Essentially having to do with this monster hunter going through his daily life, and he collects the severed heads of monsters he's killed. And one day he notices that a specific head in his trophy room is missing. The head of the monster who killed his daughter. It's a slow burn, atmospheric, spooky, interesting, beautifully shot, like Viking, barbarian-esque horror title that is very simple and to the point, but also very impressive considering the budget it was made on and the guy who made it only making cheap, like, goofy ass slasher films. That's it. That's The Headhunter.